Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, Episode 7. My name is Lee. I am in Western Australia. This week we are joined with, returning after being married, we've got Zev.
Hooray!
And we've got Tim over in Victoria.
Howdy.
Now, this week we're going to be talking about the big hullabaloo around the Safe Schools initiative. And we're also going to talk about anti-protesting laws in Western Australia. So let's start off with Safe Schools. So for those who aren't in the know, Safe Schools is a government initiative which essentially is providing curriculum to combat combat bullying for gay and lesbian and transgender and the full complexity of whatever that acronym is. Those sorts of students in public schools or in schools. The Conservatives have got very upset. They're jumping it down a fair bit. We've had speeches in Parliament. We've had all sorts. And the left have jumped to its defence. So what are your thoughts? What do you think is the libertarian view on safe schools?
Well, the government shouldn't be pushing any sort of agenda in schools, whether you agree with it or not. I mean, schools should basically stick to, teaching what parents aren't able to teach, which is those solid academic subjects. That's the libertarian position in a nutshell. There's a lot of other things you can go into it as well, but I'll let Zeev get his opening remarks in.
Well, that I think perhaps Tim might be taking a view I disagree with. I certainly think schools are there to teach people about beliefs. I just think that the beliefs that they teach should be really up to the parents and the students in turn who enroll their kids in that school. This particular curriculum, look, I mean, if people want to take on a curriculum and like it, that's their choice. But what we have now is a government-mandated system in part, so there's less choice involved, I suppose.
Well, I don't think it's actually mandated. I think they're just offering it, but it's government subsidised.
But it's a government-initiated program, so it comes with the stamp of approval of government.
Yes, I guess. I mean, it's coming with $8 million of taxpayer money, which, I mean, is a drop in the bucket, a drop in the ocean. I mean, as I think Helen Dale showed on Facebook this week, that the federal chaplaincy program is like $237 million or something. So
yeah, in the scheme of things, it's small fry. But I guess the issue is, I mean, should the government be engaging in that kind of public education program? That's what a libertarian would be saying. It's not really for the government to do that. It's the government should be sticking to things like defence and law enforcement and so on. And education should be left up to parents, students, and the schools they enrol their kids in.
But
I mean, well, can I just
basically, basically, if we are to have a public education system, it should just focus on specialized academic areas and not, as it's called, educating the whole child.
So let me push back just a little bit, just as a bit of devil's advocate. So, I mean, it is the government's responsibility, if they're going to run schools, to make sure that they are safe for any sort of minority, be it gay or Asian or whatever the minority is, religious minorities, all of them. So under that, I mean that sort of duty of care, surely you could say, well, there is an argument to say, well, $8 million is a lot of money, but it's chicken feed. The program. I mean, I guess we could debate the relative merits of the actual material itself, but theoretically, coming up with a way of educating people in the schools that they are running to not bully transgender and gay and lesbian kids, like, surely that's, you can make an argument that that's actually, from a libertarian perspective, that's okay.
Well, it is. I agree, but I think one of the issues has been that the debate seems to be one in which people are talking past each other the Conservatives seem to be saying, well, this material will, turn children into Sodom and Gomorrah, but they're pretty light on the details. They're not exactly quoting anything from the material that I can
Well, a
see.
lot of it is like a lot of what they say is valid, but then there's also if you click on the links on the Safe Schools website, you might get access to this website down the track, which has a lot more radical content on it.
Yeah, that seems to be a bulk of it. Like, I mean, George Christensen is a Queensland Liberal National guy in the federal parliament, had a big speech saying, essentially sort of doing guilt by association. That is, if you go from this website to this website to this website to this website, you end up with you end up with sex shops and you end up with all sorts of stuff. Which I mean,
you could always look on the links of George Christensen's website, and like the chain would probably link to some other sort of groups.
So this is why I've always been a bit skeptical of the argument. I mean, I've seen a lot of material saying, the people who devised it were Marxists. This is cultural Marxism, or whatever that means. But at the end of the day, I'm just looking for the actual material that you're objecting to. I don't really care who wrote it. I want you to quote the material and tell me, this is the material. How can you possibly let your child near it?
Yeah.
I just haven't seen enough of that.
I've read some of the material. I mean, it does go because it's such a contentious social issue that it's dealing with, that it does go too far in sort of wanting to overthrow what they term heteronormativity and sort of wanting to degender sort of schools, which is sort of like most Australians are sort of, I think, on simple fairness grounds, tolerant of LGBTI people, but I think when they sort of see that sort of stuff, it's sort of like, what?
Yeah, I think that may be so, but I guess if that occurs, I mean, what one curriculum lesson in which people are being asked to put themselves in the shoes of some gay dude, I don't know if that will cause Sodom and Gomorrah tomorrow.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm putting it down too much. Maybe there is a valid concern there, but that's like a valid concern then about a portion of the curriculum, all of it.
Yeah.
This is what. Yeah. I mean, I've read some of the quotes too, but it's not a very comprehensive analysis, which makes it very difficult for me to, pass through it and say, well, this is is it just like a couple of quotes here and there? Is it the whole thing?
It's the way the worldview that it's taken is very sort of wanting to sort of how should I put it? It's certainly trying to sort of have more sort of like gay sort of culture in the curriculum. That's certainly what it's trying to do, but it's certainly not, as some have suggested, like it's not an X-rated curriculum. I mean,
like I think there's some like. So I mean, the nature of, I mean, when you're dealing with a small minority, which particularly with transgender people in general, I mean, we're talking a very small percentage of a fraction of a percentage of the population. The number of organizations that cater to the interests and needs of those people is very, very small. So there is going to be overlap between organizations that like sell sex toys and and then also then support clubs and organizations that support transgender teens or adults. So it's one of those things, like just the very nature of the size of the group of people you're talking about means that there's going to be a lot of people working together who maybe in a larger group of people wouldn't necessarily need to have contact.
I basically, like, as a principal, have a problem with governments having, especially school programs that push forward their point of view. I mean, I don't like government tolerance programs. They actually tend to backfire. And I would probably be saying the same thing because I'm sure the social conservatives would love to have an anti-gay program in schools. I mean, that's what they'd really like. So I just don't think that schools should be a battleground for these sort of culture wars.
I mean, I think, this is obviously an issue that is growing in people's minds. So I mean, I guess I have a concern in the sense that it's promoting a particular view of sexuality and gender, which reasonable people can disagree about. Like, like, I think it's reasonable to suggest that, most people have a view that gender is fixed, by and large. There is obviously a small group of people who are different, but otherwise, people are bored with male gender, male bits of men, and people with women bits of women, and that's the way the world works, as opposed to sort of a more of a spectrum approach. So I mean, like, I don't ever say that those people are the devil because they believe what they believe. What they believe there's some rationality to it. So I guess in that regard, there is a bit of a problem if the government supports material that has a particular view without really sort of having alternatives, alternative ways that people can express it. But I mean, I guess in a sense, like, if you really like having a material for schools to create a place, to assist teachers in what they're doing, in promoting a safe place for kids to grow up to be whatever they're going to be. Like, it doesn't really, I mean, it certainly doesn't make me mad. Could that $8 million be spent on something better? Probably. Am I that worried? Not really. I certainly don't, because I'm a conservative Christian, I got a lot of conservative Christian mates, and the way they're sort of reacting to this it is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Like, it is the world is slowly dissolving in their eyes. Like, it's totally over the top. And to be frank, they don't have an alternative that works any better. And I think that's the bigger problem is, sure, people maybe want to criticize safe schools and say, well, it's not good enough. Well, you need to come up with something that is good enough then. Like, it's not good enough to say, well, this is bad, no one should have access to this. And I'm not going to do anything to help, because I mean, let's be real. Like, the Australian Christian Lobby is not, like, if I wanted to get help to assist somebody who's having issues with their gender, like, I'm not going to go talk to the Australian Christian Lobby. Like, I don't think they'd even be able to point me to somebody who'd be able to give me even the beginnings of a reasonable way of approaching that. So I think it's actually kind of just nastiness in the end. Like, it's actually just, it is coming out of spite, because I don't think they actually seriously want to help people who have genuine issues with gender dysphoria or with, sexuality or whatever it is.
It's about freedom of conscience as well. I mean, these are people who are being forced to support a political program with which they disagree.
Yep.
And they may not be phrasing it that way. They may not be thinking about it that way. But that's clearly part of the outrage, I think, is that they're being forced to do it. I think, I think that's probably, there may well still be some outrage if it wasn't a government program, but perhaps not as much.
Oh yeah, well, there would be. I mean, even if it wasn't, even if it's just public schools, like, I think just the very nature of having government-run schools brings this in. So, if a private school wanted to do it, then I don't think it would attract it. But even if it wasn't a government-created program, even if it was just a privately funded thing that happened to be in public schools, there would be outrage. In the same way that, scripture classes and all the rest of it generates outrage for other groups of people, even though none of that necessarily is funded by the government either. So,
schools are the biggest battleground in the culture wars. I mean, obviously these groups wouldn't want, if they were public or private schools, any gay-related issues taught in any of them. I mean, we all know that would be their ultimate preference. But my major, as I said before, my objection to it is the fact that it's, a government, it's a top-down approach to social change when it should always be, bottom-up. Social change should come from, people interacting at the community level.
All right, well, let's maybe we'd spend, because we've probably another few minutes before we can talk about the anti-protesting laws. Let's just talk sort of a bit about the culture wars and libertarians, because it's one of those things that it's a very peculiar beast, the culture wars. Like, it sort of it obviously cuts across issues of coercion in private behaviour, but not always. I mean, what do you guys reckon about, should libertarians be involved in the culture wars, particularly in the kind of the left-right element of things? Because, I mean, I think in a lot of these situations, libertarians have a very strong and consistent position, which is let people decide for themselves. You know, is there a role beyond that for libertarian? You know, as a distinctive libertarian philosophy, or is that that's the beginning and the end of the the libertarian perspective on the culture wars?
I think that it depends who you ask there, isn't it? I mean, I think, and I don't mean to speak for Tim, but you know, Tim Andrews has sometimes expressed the view that there's a conservative case for libertarianism in a sense, that the family unit provides a stable background for the upbringing of people, children, etc., in which in turn society can function and grow successfully and prosper. And if people are left alone to do that for themselves, then in turn society will prosper. And deviations from that norm should be tolerated, perhaps even celebrated at times. But it's that family unit at its core that is the backbone of our society. And I think, perhaps for some conservatives, and again, hesitantly I'd name Tim, but I don't want to put ideas in his mouth. I think for some conservatives, the ideas go together. For others, not so much.
I think that libertarians can certainly have their own view of how things ought to be, and can certainly put that view forward in their personal sphere. But when it comes to government shouldn't condemn or support any sort of particular way of living, so to put it.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's the obvious libertarian statement on a lot of these things, because unfortunately, the left and the right want to use the government to force people to comply.
And it's so frustrating.
Yeah, and it's awful and evil when they try to do that. I guess, I'm a conservative Christian, so I have a particular, as I've already said, conservative Christian, I've got a particular view on marriage and family and all this sort of stuff. But part of me, when people get really worked up by other people talking about their own views, is I kind of just think, well, what does it matter? Maybe, it's I guess as a libertarian, and I think the natural instinct of the libertarian is to kind of is to be quite humble, to say, well, I don't have all the answers. I can be wrong. There is I guess when you believe in a market of ideas, there is a sort of inherent self-improving. Sorry, say again?
Yeah, I'd have to disagree with that. I definitely think that, the way that I think society should be is the right view, but certainly that doesn't mean that I enforce it on everyone.
Sure.
So I sort of don't take that relativist view.
It's not a relative.
I wouldn't say my view's relativist at all. I think, if we were to talk about theology just for 5 seconds, I think that Jesus is the only way to God. Therefore, Islam, every other sort of religion, every other sort of theological system is wrong. I don't think you have to be a relativist. I think it's just there's an element of humility that goes with libertarian philosophy that sort of values, or I think should value, open discourse. I don't think libertarians should really feel the need to shout down people who disagree with them. Obviously when you get into the issue of liberty and government and that sort of that's a whole different kettle of fish, because that's where you go from saying, well, this is what I think and it's a good idea, to this is what I think and I'm going to force, I'm going to use the power of the government to force you. I think that is an issue where libertarians do and should continue to stand up and really get in their faces. But I guess I look at a lot of other things, safe schools, for example. I sort of think, leaving aside the public schools thing, if it was, we were talking about non-government schools, I'd think, well, that's okay. Let them, they want safe schools. Maybe I don't want safe schools. That's fine. And I don't want to get worked up about it. So I don't know.
Yeah, if some lefties wanted to create a hippie school, like that would be fine with me, as long
Yeah,
as it's not run by the government.
yeah. Like there's a live and let live attitude in libertarianism, which I think is a genuinely good thing for social cohesion. Like, like I think part of the problem with the left, both the left and the right, is they actually want everybody to think like they do, and they can't tolerate the fact that people don't. And I think, well, I can disagree with people, and that's okay. Let them be like that.
My favorite right is the right to be left alone.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I mean, I guess that sort of makes me wonder, like, should libertarians really put much energy to be in the culture wars? Because so much of the culture wars is about browbeating people, and it's browbeating people to make yourself feel better. Like it's not persuading people. Like I think persuading people is always always should be a humble process because it's a dialogue. But browbeating other people to gee up the troops. I mean, I occasionally read Breitbart and National Review and those sorts of outlets, and really a lot of what they say, like sometimes they bring up stuff and I'm like, this is the complete opposite of what you're saying it is. Like it's because it's not about persuading others, it's about you are saying to their readers, you are right to think what you think, you're part of the greatest people on earth, and those people over there, they're horrible, ugly, blah blah blah. It's just about rallying the troops to a cause for this. I don't know.
I haven't read a National Review in a while, but I think you may be going. They might be a bit unfair to National Review. When I read them, at least, I found them very interesting.
I think National Review is better, but certainly Breitbart, as a conservative, it's just like...
Breitbart is basically, like, I enjoy consuming Breitbart, but that's basically is because it, showcases how stupid the left are, and, like, which is good for when I want to consume that, but also I want to consume some conservatives that are stupid as well.
Yeah. And that's why I read Breitbart as well, but sometimes when they bring up stuff, like, this is demonstrating how evil the left is, I kind of look at it and go, well, the only reason you would think that is because you have to think that the left is the devil. And I think libertarians, because we have positions that cut across both left and right, I think we can sort of be a bit more... Well, I think we should be a bit more fair-minded towards both sides and not assuming that both sides are the devil. Or, like, one side is the devil over the others.
They're both equally devils, in my opinion.
Oh, anyway, this is just the hobby horse that I've had for the last week or so. Let's talk about the WA anti-protesting law. So essentially last year, the Western Australian government brought in some laws to target situations where protesters are shackling themselves to gates or to machinery. Obviously, this is environmentalists or like, in particular, and basically blocking otherwise legal activity. And the response was to bring in laws that criminalize that sort of thing. It reversed the onus of proof in circumstances where they have, if they have chains or locks or whatever it is, all the police need to do is demonstrate that they had those materials, and then it's up to the protesters to then prove that they weren't there to block illegal activity. So, all sorts of pretty ordinary stuff in terms of freedom of speech and what are your guys' thoughts on this particular issue?
Goodness, where do you start? I mean, this is, and I said this to you briefly before the show, but this is basically government by press release. This may be it may be a problem that some environmentalists are going too far. Fine. But the fact of the matter is that police can arrest people right now if they're making a nuisance of themselves at a protest. It is not hard to prove that they're making a nuisance of themselves in a protest. Not in this day and age. Not with smartphones and cameras. And certainly not for police on stuff. And you know what? If there's an element of doubt about whether the protesters are actually doing it, they can still get arrested. And what will happen is that they will be arrested and perhaps be charged, perhaps not, and they will have been drawn away from the protest regardless. And if they do it enough times, they're going to get caught and they're going to be found guilty. Now, the system, as far as I see it, is not going to be improved by a bunch of laws that just render it draconian. I don't think it's going to make it any easier to catch protesters.
It's not exactly like they're hiding anyway. Like, these guys are chaining themselves to a particular point. Like, you know, it's not like they're running away or anything.
They're not exactly.
I
they're
mean,
not,
I know there should. I know there should be some principled libertarian position to this issue, but these greenie protesters are troublemakers. They're stopping, you know, what is legal development, and basically, you know, these laws are basically trying to, you know, uphold private property rights, and, you know, basically, you know, they're not innocent people. I mean, they're destructive greenies, and so,
Sure.
you know, I don't really, you know, feel that threatened by these laws at all.
Well, except that, you know, I mean, well, this is a good question maybe for Zev to answer, since you're a lawyer. You know, is there ever a circumstance where reversing the burden of proof, so making, you know, like, for those who aren't aware of the burden of proof, you know, if you're charged with a crime, it's upon the government to demonstrate that you broke the law, you know, and all this other stuff. It's not up to you to prove that you're innocent. So,
Yeah.
Zev, is there any circumstance in which reversing the onus of proof is, like, actually a good idea or even justified?
No. Simply put, there is never a good reason to reverse the onus of proof. Ever, ever, ever. I don't know how to express that more emphatically. It's illogical to reverse the onus of proof because it converts finger pointing, that is to say, accusations, into proof. It means that you've found the person guilty until they can prove otherwise. That
I mean,
does,
I guess in, like, you know, particularly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always issue with. I mean, government law, or, you know, legislation from politicians is always vagueness, and I guess the issue which we should be concerned on as a general principle. I mean, yeah, okay, they're filthy hippies, but if you're undermining the rule of law and you're creating a bunch of really broad rules which the police can then enforce, and then also reversing the onus of proof, like, then you've got a circumstance where, okay, you're loitering in a street, the police really want to get rid of you, okay, you are now being charged under these laws, and now it's upon you, you know, to either plead out or, you know, like, you know, you got this huge, I mean, it's 12 months in prison and I think like 20 grand fine. Like, it's actually quite a substantial penalty. So, I mean, I guess...
Because it is a real problem. I mean, Zeev can have sort of these pure legal arguments, but at the end of the day, these protesters are violating property rights of people doing legal activities, and so I don't see really if the police were going to abuse the existing laws, they would have done so far. I mean, in the States, obviously, the police go too far in a lot of issues, but it seems in Australia, especially with the socialists in Melbourne, the police aren't actually hard enough.
Yeah, except for a start, you don't get to see every time the police do the wrong thing, and so, you know, okay, when there's a huge protest and the cameras are everywhere, the police are on their best behaviour, but, you know, the benefit of smartphones is that we get to see times when otherwise maybe we wouldn't have seen when the police is on their best behaviour. So, you know, if they're targeting some lone Aboriginal guy who's just wandering down the street, maybe he's a bit drunk, maybe he's being a bit of a nuisance, but the police really want to get him, you know, you're not necessarily going to see that sort of thing. So just to say, well, the police will do the right thing, well, you can't assume that. And secondly, I guess I'd point out and say, well, is this the best solution for that problem? And I don't think it is. I think if you're having a problem with expensive police operations removing filthy hippies, then make them pay for the police to remove them. You know, I mean, like, if they're going to, you know, if it costs...
They've got no money.
Well,
then they go bankrupt, and that's a penalty in and of itself.
These laws apply to anybody who is suspected of disturbing the peace. This is what the classic error is when people discuss these laws. They discuss who the governments say they are targeting to introduce them. But
Excellent
the
point.
notional target of these laws is not actually who will be affected by the laws. What will happen is that the application of the laws will expand, and it will expand to include ordinary citizens.
Yep.
Now, if people wish to express their views on the street, publicly protesting, what will happen is that they will now be in greater danger of being harassed by police. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen tomorrow. I'm not saying that police as an institution are going to convert themselves into jackbooted authoritarians who prevent everyone from protesting in the street. But I am saying that these kinds of laws apply generally, not just to environmental hippies locking themselves up. And yes, over time, more and more laws like these can lead to authoritarian police states.
I mean, you just need to look at the US. Like, I mean, part of the issue, you never know when the, like, all of a sudden the confluence of the legislation and the attitude of the police and the political environment, you never know when they're going to come together to create a police state. And you only need to look to the US to see where people are having hundreds of thousands of dollars taken by the government, and then under the guise of anti-drug, like drug cartel legislation, and they were doing legal activity, and they were charged under vague law. Not even charged. Their money was taken under vague laws, and then they're forced to go to court to prove that no, actually, everything I was doing was legal. So you never that's the nature of government systems, is they're not accountable, and so you never know when these things are going to start to come together at a point, and really terrible, awful things are going to happen, because it's just the nature of the world. It's just too complex to be able to predict cause and effect. But you can have the last word, and we'll finish it up.
It comes down to me that this particular law, it doesn't really set my alarm bells off, and I'd rather focus on sort of other more pressing civil liberties issues. But if I'm proved wrong, you can say I told you so.
Sure. All right. Well, I'll say that while I'm in prison for speaking the truth in under the Barnett jackboot.
Well, that's what you get for being in WA.
Yeah. Serves me right. All right. Well, this is episode 7 of Taking Liberties for season 3. We're going to be back again next week with more discussion about liberty and how to make it a reality.
Alrighty. So long.
Bye.